For those of you who don't know, the Detroit Regional Chamber is the chamber for the Detroit metro area. We represent about 20,000 members and affiliates, companies that are connected to us in some way or another, over really a 10-county area. We're located in downtown Detroit. We're actually one of the largest chambers in the country. Education and talent is one of our 3 pillars, along with economic growth, regional collaboration, and then we work really hard to try and provide a lot of benefit to our members. So I've worked at the chamber for actually 25 years on education and talent issues, almost all of that time. So just a little bit of background about why an organization like the chamber will get involved with education and the Common Core in particular, what drives our position. And to start with, it really revolves around the fact that, the business community is really looking at a very, very different marketplace than it looked at 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So just the change in the labor market, the kinds of jobs available for people, and what's happened over the last 25 years. So if you go back to 1989 and look at what kind of education attainment people have had as they filled jobs between then and now, so what the 24-year period that this study covered, the number of jobs filled by people with a bachelor's degree or higher have increased 82%. The number of jobs held by someone with an associate's degree or a technical degree close to that, those jobs have increased 42%. The number of jobs held by people with a high school diploma or less have decreased by 14%. And a lot of that decrease was very recent, starting with the economic downturn in 2008-9. Those jobs disappeared, and the jobs for people with more educated backgrounds leveled off and started to increase. The jobs lost by people with less education never really came back. So sometimes people look at that and they think, well, we just have people with college degrees filling jobs that didn't require it. But actually, the wage differential for people with a degree and those who don't has grown. So that really suggests there's a shortage. People are paying people with college degrees more versus other people than they used to. So, and there's much less unemployment the higher up you go in the education fund. So people with a master's degree, on average, make $1,300 a week, and the unemployment rate for those people is 2.8%. For people with a bachelor's degree, the unemployment rate is 3.5%, and they make, on average, $1,100 a week. Now, you hear all the stories about kids who graduate and they're working at Starbucks, and that's often true in the short term. But if you look at what happens to people in the long term, people with college degrees end up in professions. Associate's degree, unemployment rate of 4.5%. Average weekly earnings, $792. You get down to less than high school, 9% unemployment, and you know what unemployment rates are vastly understated. That's just people with, who are actively looking for it. It doesn't count people who kind of give them up. And their earnings are less than half people with college. So the labor market is shifting to demanding people with more education. And it makes sense because we're entering sort of a manufacturing-based economy. At least we still manufacture a lot, it takes fewer people to do it, and entering a knowledge economy. And so as an organization, we look at that and say, our goal should be to ensure that all students graduate from high school with the education background that allows them to make a choice about what they want to do after high school. So they're not tracked by by an education administrator that says, that decided for them, you're going to go off in this direction, you're going to go off in that direction. So just a personal story. I'm a parent of a special needs son. He's on the autism spectrum and has emotional issues. We homeschooled him for a couple of years. He ended up graduating from a high school center-based program. And he graduated having that Michigan Merit Curriculum, which is very aligned with the Common Core. And so he took the tough algebra classes. He took the chemistry classes. And a lot of people said, what will he use that for? Well, I'll tell you, even for kids who are not going on to the University of Michigan, he left there, he went to a place called Michigan Career Technical Institute, which is a career technical school for emotionally impaired kids in West Michigan. You have to pass a test before you can enter specific programs. So he had to take a version of the ACT called Work Team, and he had to score to meet a certain threshold in algebra just to get into his cabinet making program. He didn't meet the threshold to get into the automotive tech program. So the idea that not every kid needs to be educated to a high standard, I'm telling you as a parent, with a kid with, that comes from a tough, challenging background, that even for him to survive in the real world, he needs an education, not kind of a dumbed-down curriculum that kids that aren't going to college. Every kid needs to be prepared when they're in high school. In addition to kind of, being important for an individual, having to have the right kind of education coming out of high school to prepare them for whatever option they choose to pursue, education attainment increasingly drives economic prosperity. So if you go back to the year 2000, Michigan, well, about 50 states, we were 16th in per capita income. Our education attainment, as measured kind of the percentage of adults with a college degree, we were 36th. So 35 other states had more people with a 4-year degree than we did. Yet, we still, because we had a lot of good-paying, low-skilled jobs, we were still able to be 16th in per capita income. That world, in just a decade, has vanished. Michigan is now 36th, 37th in per capita income, which aligns almost exactly with our education attainment. And it's true across the spectrum. If you look at regions, if you look at states, their median per capita income will equal the percentage of their adults with some kind of post-secondary degree. The only exceptions are states like Wyoming, Alaska, and Texas that have mineral wealth. So if you're extracting oil and natural gas, you still have workers that might not have a lot of formal education. But otherwise, as a state and a region, your economy will be driven by the education level of your population. And there's even more specific measurement. Organizations called CEOs for cities actually figured out a measurement for this. They said, for every 1% increase in the percentage of adults who have a college degree, so if you go from 28, Detroit area is about 28% of the population with a college degree. If we get to 29%, on average, there's an $850 boost to median per capita income. And the boost doesn't just go to people who have a degree. It goes to people who maybe just have a high school education. So if you're a person with just a high school education, you'll make more money in a region with a lot more educated people than you will in a region with fewer educated people. And I'll explain that in a minute. But we've made this transition. In the old economy, people followed jobs. So when Henry Ford a century ago offered a $5 workday, people came from around the world to get one of those jobs. In the 1950s, my dad came from Ohio because there just wasn't work in his city to Detroit because he thought he could get a job. Detroit was a booming manufacturing network. Today, it's companies that are following really educated people. So a couple of Google figured, the apex of the knowledge economy, right? They just paid almost $2 billion for a building in Manhattan because that's where the people that they need live. And they can't build their building in the middle of the field in Iowa somewhere and expect that kind of talent to come to them. I'm going to talk about where Michigan is really behind, but I'll give you an example of where our talent really works for us. And that's in the automotive research and design area. So, we've all seen over the last few decades, 3 or 4 decades, foreign automakers have come to the United States. Honda, Toyota, Nissan, and they haven't built their plants in Michigan. They built them predominantly in the south, the southeast. And so a company like Toyota, they build their plants in Texas and Alabama because they can get a relatively unskilled workforce to come and want to work for the wages they can pay. But they put their R&D facilities into Detroit because you can't put a research and design facility in the middle of the field in Alabama and expect to get really educated people. So they put, because we have this concentration of educated research design engineers in the Detroit area, they put their facilities here. So it's an example of how important talent is, and it really starts to override everything else in developing the economy. You have to have people that can do those kinds of jobs. You want to make that transition from the manufacturing economy that's disappearing. In terms of, we still make a lot of stuff, it just takes fewer and fewer people. If we're going to make the transition to a knowledge economy where we have good paying jobs for people, we have to have an educated workforce. So where does Michigan stand in perspective? So and Sarah can maybe get into some more of the details, but a lot of people want to look at education in Michigan and say, well, kind of drag down like what happens in Detroit public schools or minority students. If you compare proficiency rates on the NAEP test, which is a nationally standardized sample of kids. Michigan went from 13th in 2003 to 45th, just for the white students. So it's not that we're getting that much worse, it's just the rest of the country starting to pass us by. Their education reform efforts are getting better traction. They're improving their outcomes. Michigan is basically staying stagnant or slipping back just a little bit. 13th out of 50 states, 45th in one day, where we see. So we talked about the importance now in this economy of kids being able to go into some kind of college, whether it's technical trade school, community college, school. 27%, so a minority of our students, not all of our students, not even a majority are getting a post-secondary degree. Even of those who go into college, 27% require some kind of remediation once they get. So as taxpayers, you pay for the student to be educated in K-12, and now you're paying again when they go to college, or community college or university, to make up for what they didn't learn in college, in high school. And as a country, so we're making this huge shift. So are we getting better at educating our population? And especially what's happening, we all hear about income inequality. If you take the lowest fifth of the population in terms of income, in the 1970s, 6%, if you were the bottom fifth in terms of income, you had a 6% chance of ending up with a college degree. Here it is, 40 years later, we're only at 90%. From 6% to 90%. So 91% of kids who are, in that bottom fifth of incomes are destined to stay in those lower tier because we don't have a system that adequately educates those kids for post-secondary. In 1995, just as recently as 1995, we ranked first in the world in the percentage of adults with some kind of college degree, 2 of 40. Today we're 19th out of 20. And again, it's not that we're going backwards. We've gone from 33 to 39% of people with some kind of degree. It's just the rest of the world has figured this out, and they know they've got to prepare their population for this knowledge economy jobs. And we're not adapting as quickly as they are. So too many of the young people just are not being prepared to get a job with a family-sustaining wage. So it's not that we're necessarily so much worse than we were, it's that we're not keeping pace with everyone else. And so as a result, Michigan joined with tons of other states in trying to see what kind of standards do we need our kids to meet in order to successfully transition to post-secondary education and know that they can succeed. So the National Governors Association convened a group, included, it was essentially all the state superintendents, and they engaged education experts, and I asked Sarah to talk a little bit about who developed the standards and what they are. But to come up with a set of, and I'm very, very careful here, a set of standards and expectations that tell us what a student should know when. But I want to be very clear about what the Common Core is not, and that is a national curriculum. They are standards that state what you should know. But how a student learns that is determined locally. It's up to the local school district. So we've all seen on Facebook, I see at least once a day, I see a little post that says, watch this dad destroy this terrible Common Core problem in 10 seconds. There's no such thing as a Common Core math problem. What you're seeing is some educator at a local level who designed a problem to try and meet the standard, but just did a bad job of it. So, the standard says kids need to know how to do 3-digit multiplication. It's up to the local district to get the kid there. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is, so I've also heard, well, these standards will bring us down from here. Our standards are higher than lower. Well, I think if you look at those, where Michigan ranks compared to other states, whereas the country is ranked compared to other people, we're not meeting these exceptionally high standards. And there's nothing about the Common Core that says you can't exceed those standards. So if you have a school and the standard says by the end of this grade, kids should be able to do long division, 3-digit long division, 2-digit long division, 2-digit division, and you can do 3-digit long division, or you can do 3-digit or 4-digit multiplication. There's nothing that stops you from doing it. It just says that at a minimum, the kids are going to meet a certain expectation. So with that, I'm going to ask Sarah to come up and get a little more into the details around the Common Core, and then we'll hear from the other side of the aisle here, and hopefully answer questions. We'll all learn something. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. So just to give you a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm
statewide education issues. We have presence in something advocating at the state level with lawmakers. And I lead our research and data team. So I get into the numbers and the weeds and what research says works to improve outcomes for kids. And our mission is really to raise achievement for all Michigan kids, particularly to close achievement gaps. So try to help kids who are typically not served very well by public schools, help them kind of raise the level of their outcomes. A little bit of background on me. I was a public school teacher in New York City for several years and then moved to Michigan to get my doctorate in education policy. I'm not from Plymouth, but my husband actually grew up in Plymouth down the street from here. I went to Our Lady of Good Counsel Elementary School. I have family members who are still in Plymouth schools, so I have a connection personally to this issue and this area as well as professionally. So, Greg did a good job sort of setting the stage for why high standards, high academic standards are important in our public schools. And it talks to you a little bit about how those standards were designed and what that means for implementation in our schools in Michigan today. So he mentioned that the National Governors Association, the superintendent, sort of led an effort in 2000, the late sort of first decade of the 2000s, so 2006 to 2008, led an effort to say, okay, as a country, what do our students really need to know at the end of high school so that they can prepare to do whatever they want to do in the 21st century economy? So it wasn't an effort sort of by any particular president or party. It was really a very bipartisan effort across the governors and superintendents to say, now that our economy has changed, we live in a global economy, what do our kids need to really know? And that process took several years. They worked with educators and experts, research experts in academia and in K-12 to sort of develop what should those sentences be? What should those standards be? Every kid who graduates high school in America should be able to know their addition, know their multiplication. And keep in mind too, this was only in English language arts and math. So the Common Core doesn't deal with science or social studies. And it was a long process, a collaborative process, and Michigan State Board of Education agreed to adopt those standards back in 2010. Common Core just had its 5th year anniversary at the set of standards. So these aren't sort of brand new off the dock. These have been kind of vetted through a lot of different processes. And Michigan educators have been implementing them, getting training on them, trying to understand what that means for their practice for several years now. I think we're hearing a lot of talk now about what that means for Michigan because our students are just being tested on them for the first time this year. So we've had several years to sort of get up to speed, and now our state assessments are aligned to those standards. I think what's important to know is, and to Greg's point, there's a lot of ways to get students to meet those standards, right? Just like there are many ways you can teach your child how to do addition, there's a lot of different ways to get to the certain high rigorous standards of the Common Core is calling for. So it's not as much about changing everything the teacher is doing in their classroom. It's really about saying, okay, what do we sort of commonly agree is the basic knowledge that a citizen should have when they graduate? And teachers are welcome to, and most of them do, go above and beyond that or approach that from different directions, and that's encouraged. I think what you might see in some of the curricular conversation is that there are certainly vendors out there who are trying to make money to create resources and materials for teachers to use to help them reach those standards, right? And a lot of teachers really value that work, right? So, they want resources, they want things to use to help them teach to whatever the standards are for the state. So you'll see that out there, but those by themselves are not the Common Core. I think the other thing I wanted to say is standards in education is not a new concept. So we've had standards in Michigan for a long time, state-developed standards, and they've been really different than what you might see in other states. So, we might all have our opinions about your child left behind and all the testing that came with that. that every single state in the country had a different idea of what it meant to be ready to graduate from high school. They had different standards. And so when you compared state results to national results, they were wildly different. So for many, many years, Michigan, for instance, was telling parents that about 65% of our students in fourth grade are proficient in reading. On the national assessment, that number is closer to 30%. So there's clearly not the same sort of consistent idea of what it meant to be proficient in reading compared to our state standards and what kind of national expectations of the national classroom. So one of the goals of the Common Core movement was to really say, okay, let's get on the same page here. What a proficient reader in Michigan is not suddenly not proficient when they go to Alabama, right? And we need to have some consistency in how we're understanding those certain benchmarks that are important. So Common Core isn't sort of suddenly we had standards when we didn't. We've had standards for quite some time in Michigan. These are simply ones that are aligned to what other states are doing and what educators from around the country agree are sort of necessary knowledge for kids to know. So I'm going to end there, and I'm eager to take your questions and hear what you guys think.
Hi, I'm Braun. I'm a voice actor, so I have 6 children, and we're in Handel. So, my background. I have 6 children. Been married for 29 years. I've homeschooled my 6 children. My oldest is 26. She graduated from UM Dearborn. She's now married. My second sons, Marine 1 and Marine 2, I call them, Jason and Josh. Went to the Marine Corps. My first son is now out, and he's attending Eastern Michigan University. My fourth child and next daughter is at Eastern Michigan. My 5th daughter is at Schoolcraft, and my baby is 11 and just graduated from 6th grade. And my background in this issue, it comes back to 1994, I believe, when homeschooling had technically become legal in the state of Michigan. We had passed a law based on a couple of court cases that said that Michigan had the natural and Michigan parents had the natural and fundamental right to educate their children, that the state works in cooperation with the parents. Not the other way around. Parents, you are not required to cooperate with the state. We are the boss. We call the shots according to state law. That's in the Michigan School Code. And after that law was passed, I contacted a state senator I've been working with, and I asked him, I said, okay, we have a law that guarantees homeschool freedom, allegedly. What's next? And he laughed at me and he said, Karen, do you have a rest? And I said, no, not really. But I really do want to know. And he asked me then a question that became what I jokingly refer to, and my children jokingly refer to as my 7th child. He asked me a question. He said, have you ever heard of Michigan School to Work? And I was a young mom at the time, 5 young kids, and I said, no. And he said, send me your address, back before email. He sent me a packet of information, and I started reading it because I'm a voracious researcher, and I got to page 35, where it said, the State School to Work Initiative will provide all children with the opportunity to engage in a program of job training and work experiences that are relevant to a student's career major, and lead to the award of a skills certificate, including pre-employment and employment skills, to be mastered at progressively higher levels. Students will be encouraged to make a career decision, not in college, by 10th, no later than the 11th grade. That was in 1994. It has since even been lowered from then. If you have children in public school, they're probably participating in things known as career cruising, career assessments, things that read more like a target application than they do an academic exercise. Testing and asking questions about what our children think, what they feel, and what they want to be when they grow up. I submit to you that no 9th or 10th grader should be faced with that decision to the point where they're locked in. And that's exactly what we're looking at with the Common Core. And the School to Work Initiative, like I said, was started in the 90s under President Bill Clinton. but I certainly do not want to place all the blame on him. There was another man who worked with him. His Undersecretary of Education was a man by the name of Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen was responsible for getting outcome-based education, or Goals 2000, through Congress. They were successful until they weren't, and it basically died in the late 90s. Michael Cohen went on to work for an organization. First, he worked for the Bush administration and helped work through No Child Left Behind. And then afterwards, he went to work for an organization known as Achieve. And Michael Cohen, and I gave you all a handout here. I'm here on my own time, on my own dime. I'm sorry, I do not have flashy spiral bound handouts. But you can go to Stockton, Port, Michigan and see more details on this. But Michael Cohen, when he was technically defeated under the Clinton administration for outcome-based education, somebody from, I believe it was U.S. News and World Report, asked him, so is national standards and assessments dead? He said, no, but the traditional way of getting there through the federal government is not the way to go about it, and this quote is in your handout. Basically, he went to the states, and instead of working through the federal government, he went to work through Achieve to get the nation to accept common assessments, national assessments, and standards. So with Achieve and Bill Gates funding, he went to the National Governors Association and the Chief Council of State School Officers, and he convinced them that they needed to adopt the same set of standards. David Coleman, who is one of the lead architects for the Common Core, said, when we went to the governors and tried to convince them, we didn't tell them Obama likes them. Do you think that would have gone well with the Republican side? Well, that ought to tell you right there, this is not an origination from the Governors Association. The Governors Association is a trade lobby. It is the front for what the Common Core was seeking to achieve, what Michael Cohen and his friends were seeking to achieve. Sorry, it's the end of the day. So he went, Michael Cohen went there, and he got the states to adopt these standards. But really, it wasn't just all his fault, and to the point that these are not curricula. President Obama said in his State of the Union in 2013, 4 years ago, he started Race to the Top, a competition that convinced almost every state to develop smarter curricula. So to the point that these are not curricula, President Obama declares that we developed and incentivized smarter curricula. If Obama says that they're curricula because President Obama does not lie. So I believe it. So these are more than just a standard. They are curriculum, whether we want to say it that way or not. So he got the states, the federal government, to incentivize these standards, and 45 states adopted them. Well, what is this and how does it relate to the School to Work? School to Work had three chief components back in the Clinton administration: standards, assessments, and credentials. I refer to that now as P20. P20 is what Governor Snyder said is the new vision for education. I want to emphasize the vision of P20, a prenatal to lifelong learning system. We have to go beyond the old models of saying there are silos for K-12, silos for community college, for higher education, and for preschool. They shouldn't be separate. They can be separate institutions, not to threaten the institution, but shouldn't we make it a seamless system that is closing the gap between 0 to 5 and 18 to the next stage in life? And the 20 is not age 20, it's the 4 years post-college. So a P20 system, what was formerly known as School to Work, is a prenatal to post-college seamless educational system for jobs. And I don't have to be the one to say it, the Chamber did it for us. The goal is jobs. And I submit to you that that is not the only goal for education. In fact, it's not even our state's goal for education. Well, let me finish with Governor Snyder's quote. But shouldn't we make it a seamless system where a student in that system doesn't have to figure out all those tough choices? Wait a minute. If the student doesn't have to figure out those tough choices, who is figuring out those tough choices? And what is the toughest choice of all next to who you're going to marry? What do you want to be when you grow up? And if Governor Snyder says the student shouldn't make that choice, well, who is making it? I submit to you that it's the state. But they shouldn't make those tough choices, but can just focus on success and understand that it even starts at the prenatal stage. And and looking at the expected mother getting the right diet and the right primary care. So Governor Snyder, the Common Core, the Chamber, and all the other people pushing the common standards, assessments, and the credentials that go with it are creating a system whereby children make a career decision that education starts early. Governor Snyder said, and it's in your handout, that the purpose of education is to connect young people to careers, and that begins early. Braun just had an article in their, where is it? Governor Snyder's spokesman said, and early and middle colleges are focused on getting students tied to the skills that are needed, which is accomplished by area businesses working with schools to develop a curriculum that addresses only what is necessary to that region. So if you're in Ann Arbor, the regional business gets to decide what your child learns. If you're on the west side, maybe it's Steelcase. And when I was at this legislative hearings, I was very, very offended. Truly, I was. Because all you heard from the Business Chamber of Commerce, from the Business Roundtable, from these corporate CEOs, is that the worker pipeline is thin. That our children are not being prepared for the global economy. Well, I submit to you that the purpose of education is not workforce development. Do I want my child to get a good job? Absolutely. But if that's the starting point, that the end of education is a job, I have dehumanized my child. They're more than a job. They're more than someone else's profit. And like I said, our state constitution makes it very clear from the Northwest Ordinance. In Article 8, Section 1, it says, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Does it say anything in there about a job? No. But somehow we've gotten to the point in our state and in our country of believing that the purpose of education is a job. And at the bottom of the handout that I gave you is a quote by a Hillsdale professor. As long as students are told that the end of education is a job or a career, they will forever be servants of some master. We are not programming machines. We are teaching children. We are not producing functionaries factory-like. We are forming the minds and hearts of men and women to be human beings, honoring what is good and right and cherishing what is beautiful. When you start with an education system that recognizes the humanity of a child, or you start with an educational system that starts with that they're a commodity for workforce development, you completely approach education from a completely different mindset. And I would submit to you, you should be offended. If I ran for governor, don't worry, I'm not. But if I ran for governor and I stood up to you and said, my platform is that I want you to make every school a church-like structure for conversion to Christianity so that these children can make disciples. They become disciples and make disciples. Well, that's not the purpose of the Constitution. And you would rightly, even if you're a believer, say, no, wait a minute here. That's not the purpose of education. I understand here you're a Christian and you're gung-ho. But don't tell me that that's the purpose of education for my child. I don't happen to be Christian, and I don't want that for my kid. Well, isn't the same thing true to the Chamber of Commerce? But see, the new religion is the economy and the almighty dollar. And we're worshiping at the altar of the dollar so that we look at our children and say, how can I make your child work for me? Not how can I develop your child's mind, and maybe they'll develop their own business. No, we've got the regional chamber and these corporations telling schools what they ought to do. Our children are being tracked. There's a bill in the state legislature right now, the STEM credential, the first one. Like I said, the P20 system is standards, assessments, and the credential. Well, we all know what a credential is. I mean, how many people in here are nurses? Can you work in the nursing field without the nursing credential? Absolutely not. If I went to the U of M after studying for 10 years and mastering nursing, would they hire me? They'd want to see my credential, right? So the idea here that the standards and the assessments build towards something, and that something is that credential. That's the career major that was started in school to work back in the 90s, and we're watching it come to fruition now through the STEM credential, and there's actually 6, and I have the list here somewhere in my notes. There are 6 career pathways currently in the works: arts and communication, business management, engineering, health sciences, human services, and natural resources and agriculture. So basically what we're looking at is taking children, and the first STEM elementary school is, I believe, started in White Lake or Walled Lake. I can't remember which. So we've got a STEM elementary school. We've got a high school that's been converted to a Ford Academy in Utica. Well, what if my son or daughter doesn't want to be an engineer? That high school's not going to work for them. Where do they go? What do they do? But see, when your child is nothing more than a job, it's too bad, so sad. You happen to live in Utica, and Ford Motor Company happens to like Utica, and they want to convert the Utica High School to their workforce development system. And don't get me wrong, if Ford Motor Company with their billions of dollars wants to start an educational system, let them start a school. Probably would flourish. But don't do it with our public education system, which says that that's not the purpose for education. Change the Constitution first if you must, and let's have an honest debate about it. But let's not pretend that these standards are just standards, and they're not doing a whole lot more. If they were doing a whole lot more, answer me this. The STEM credential, we managed to get it stopped. It was voted unanimously in the Senate. Unfortunately, even our state Senator Kovac voted for the STEM credential. I believe he was here at one point. I don't know where he went. But it was voted unanimously, went to the House, and I and a few others, Tammy and others, raised Cain. And we said, no, we do not want a credential for our kids. And we stopped it in the education committee. Guess where it now sits? Workforce and talent development. I submit to you, why is a K-12 credential in a workforce development committee? Because that's how they view your child. That's how they view the educational system. It's nothing more than a conveyor belt for their bottom line for workforce development. I reject it. I reject the notion that we can't have 50 standards in this country. We have 50 states for a reason. We have a U.S. Constitution for a reason. And the 10th Amendment says that which was not given to the federal government is left to the states. And education was one of those issues that was left to the states. Arnie Duncan called 50 state standards ridiculous. I call it freedom. And I think that anybody who believes that 50 state standards is ridiculous because we cannot compare is looking at our children in the wrong way. I'm sorry, she and I were both, she's pregnant, I've had 6 children. You look great. I'm so glad I wasn't compared to you. And I was pregnant. You look beautiful. You look absolutely stunning. I was not a stunning pregnant woman. And I would be very, very sad if somebody along the way said to me, wait a minute here, this is how every pregnant woman is supposed to look at 7 months or 8 months pregnant. Well, why are we doing that to our kids? We laugh when we think about it in terms of a pregnant woman. But yet Governor Steiner said that education begins prenatally, that we're making sure that children get the right diet. We're going to have a prenatal standard. That's basically what we're looking at, and what they're using is the 3rd grade reading exam as the driving force to push back into those 0 to 5 in prenatal years. That's fundamentally ridiculous. It's fundamentally un-American, and it flies in the face of our individual liberties and freedoms. And I will submit to you this. Are we falling behind? Falling behind in what? They asked the education minister in Singapore, why do you do so well on the test, but by the time your students get to be 40, they're just over people. They're not the leaders. They're not the movers and shakers. America is producing the movers and shakers. And what he said was, he said, we have an exam meritocracy, but you in the United States have a creative meritocracy that challenges conventional wisdom, that challenges the status quo, even to the point of challenging your own government. That's not allowed in Singapore. Let's not lose that for the sake so we can compare ourselves to Singapore. Singapore's comparing themselves to us, and they're saying they're failing. Because their creative quotient is deficient compared to our creative quotient. Are there things in our educational system that we can do better? Absolutely. But let's not create a uniform, common standard of assessments and credentialing that treats our children like a commodity to track and ship to their destination in the global economy. That's not the purpose of education, and that's not why we're here as human beings. So with that, I'll leave it, and I don't know if I have any time time left for Tamara?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, Tamara, you want to say anything or you want to start with questions?
I'll take the whole minutes. Hi everybody, I'm Tammy Carlone, Tamara. Karen and I, just for the record, we're not paid. We spend pretty much 24/7 fighting this. We actually spend a lot of our own money, flyers, travel, etc. The reason we do this is because we love our kids, we love your kids, and we love our country. Okay? I have 2 children. I've sent through Northville schools from preschool through 12th grade. One's at U of M, one's still at Northville High School. I've seen a lot. I've been a really active parent. She's a homeschooler, so I'm the one with the in-classroom experience. And I'm happy to answer any questions in that regard. I have a Bachelor's of Business Administration degree and a corporate CPA. I totally get the Chamber of Commerce slant. I actually agree with many things that Greg said. Unfortunately, the conclusions are different. We're completely on opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of the conclusions he's coming to. So just because some points he makes are incredibly valid, like increased education leads to more income, I don't think there's a lot of argument there. I want the best for everybody. I want increased education and better outcomes for everybody. It's not my job to control that. It's not the government's job to control that for us in the free area. So we're coming at it from different angles. I look very forward to your questions. Greg said a couple other things too, as did Sarah, that I just wanted to address before we turn it over to Q&A. And he said that, I think she said it as well, the Common Core standards are a lot like, if not exactly the same as the old Michigan standards. And I'm wondering why we switched over them and why we've spent so much money on it. We've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars switching over to Common Core, the assessments. You mentioned remediation, the less degrees. If they're the same, why the change? Why not something better? I think it's because, like Karen said, 2020, government control. This is America and not a plan. There's 100,000 people all over our country asking if kids out of this test. It's the only way they know to say no. I don't want to be a part of this. I thank those of you that have done that. There's flyers in the back of you. I hope you got your hands on them. There's one flyer with some red marks. Please pay attention to those red marks if you feel like you're willing to do that. One of those is to ask the kids out of the state test. Sarah mentioned that Common Core is only ELA and math. I know that that's what's advertised, but the reality of what I'm seeing in the classrooms is that that's not in fact true. I was in the classroom parent-teacher conference with my daughter in Spanish 4 class. So Spanish 4 should have nothing to do with it, right? Right, so I asked how Common Core is affecting her. She turned completely red, and she started shaking, and she had to excuse herself to the bathroom. And I asked what was wrong, because she's, I know her, she's had both my kids. And she said, we can't talk about that, that's political. And I said, well, that's what's happening in the classrooms. I'm just wondering if it's affecting you. I don't know if it's affecting Spanish 4. I wish I could show you a picture of the sign that is ahead on top of the wing for foreign language at Northville High School. They've completely changed all the signs in the school to be Common Core language. They don't want to call it foreign language anymore because that's, I don't know, not global enough for you, but it's not language acquisition. So, I could talk forever about all these little examples and how it's affecting different things. Social studies, next generation science standards, the connection to AP US history that's very anti-American, anti-Christian. I could go on forever. But I'm really looking forward to your questions, so I'll stop. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We have questions, and you can bring them to the... That's fine.
imply that they were the same or much the same. I meant to draw that conclusion because we had standards before and now we have new standards, right? So just to clarify that. The main difference is that they're pushing kids to think more critically about what they're learning. So they're less focused on kind of rote memorization of facts and figures, and more focused on the kind of thinking that someone who's working in and living in an ever-changing world needs to have to deal with all of those changes, right? So instead of teaching a student to memorize necessarily a list of grammatical rules, for example, you're teaching a student how to wrestle with complicated language and understand how to unpack that language in their own words and apply those sort of lessons that they need to learn to different situations throughout their life. So it's more about raising the kind of level of bar of how we're teaching our children to think about the world and approach the world than just a list of facts and figures. That's I think the biggest difference.
I'd like to address that too. I think one of the most significant differences between the Common Core and what we had before is ownership. Fundamentally, he who owns the house gets to choose the paint colors. There's no other way of saying it. So prior to 2010, when Michigan State Board of Education adopted the Common Core, we had what were known as Blacks and Huskies, and those were Michigan-owned, Michigan-based, and subject to Michigan amendment and change and modification. Once we adopted the Common Core, we ceded the right to amend, change, modify the standards in any significant way except to add up to 10 or 15% in content, depending on who you talk to. And I actually had the privilege of asking this question to Governor Snyder. I asked him specifically, I said, Governor Snyder, why did Michigan cede control of the standards to a private trade organization? And thankfully, to his credit, he didn't deny it publicly. He did come up to me privately and call me a liar. But publicly, he answered the question and he said, we haven't ceded control of everything. We still have a seat at the table. Well, that's laughable. I mean, that's like somebody moving into my house and telling my husband, you know what, you need to sit in the seat of the child. The head position is now mine. I'm sorry. That's what we did when we adopted the Common Core. And so now we are one of 45 states that get a vote in what our students ought to know. And when I ask that critical thinking question of our state's legislators and our state school board, they're like, don't ask me those kinds of questions. So if critical thinking is the goal, they certainly don't want to answer my critical question. I don't understand it. A very fundamental question of why did we cede control of the standards to a lobby group? The NGA and the CCSO are private trade organizations. Should we give it to the Plumbers Association the next time around? Maybe. But that's the fundamental difference between what we had before. We can dicker over whether this is critical or that's critical. That's a subjective thing. The hardcore fact is we lost control.
Michigan has many jobs open but don't have skilled people to fill them. How do we educate our kids to fill these jobs if we don't have standards?
I mean, I'll start with that. Just a couple things. So, we heard about career cruising, and, I think we have to draw the distinction and use a little common sense here and understand that exposing kids to information on careers is not the same thing as trying to dictate, this is the rest of your life. Because I told you about what an accountant doesn't mean you have to be an accountant. So, providing people with information, but a lot of kids just don't understand the world that's out there and what kind of job opportunities are there and what they need to do to be prepared for. So I do favor providing kids with information through career cruising, other tools, business education partnerships, with information on careers. I do agree with the other speakers though. Education's sole purpose is not to prepare people for jobs. In fact, one of the reasons we support the Common Core is that it does work to develop more critical thinking skills. There's no employer that can tell you right now. The world is changing too fast. With technology, globalization, there's no employer that can tell you, here's what I'm going to need people doing 5 years or 10 years from now. The world changes too fast for that. What companies need are people who can think for themselves and solve problems. You know, the old low-skill jobs can be automated. Companies don't need autonomy, robots, people. They have machines for that. What can be outsourced cheaply to other places? We need people with skills who can come and critically think, not do what they're told. The world is changing. That's the reason for support for standards that teach critical thinking skills. There's companies can't manage a pipeline to say, we know 10 years from now what kind of people we're going to need doing exactly what. Those things are over. What they need are people who can come and learn on the job and think for themselves. So, I don't pretend to tell you that employment is the end goal of education. It's not what I want for my kid. It's not what anyone wants for their kid. But at the end of the day, do you want families to be able to support themselves? Do you want people to support their families, or do you want them to be a burden to taxpayers? No, I want them to be able to support themselves doing something they find interesting. So,
again, we have some common points, I would agree with. The more information kids have about careers, the better. Absolutely, 100% behind that. My child has been required to fill out career cruising, and when I asked the school what company owns the software, so I know who has all my kids' data, they don't answer me. And this data is extremely personal. I don't know if you have seen it, but there are questions about what mom does, what dad does, what school they went to, and just all sorts of personal information that I don't want out there. And my school can't even tell me where that data is, and it's required for my daughter to go to school. So again, this control is just not acceptable to me. And the question was about standards, so I want to get back to that. Standards, like they said before, on this side, are not a new thing. We agree with that. Standards aren't new. Standards aren't great. That's not what we're against. I have a different feeling in terms of my approach. I'm a freedom-loving American. I want the approach to be accountability within the school districts. Those failings don't mean that we should have the federal government control.
And just a quick point to add to that. I'm not against standards. In fact, when I was interviewed by Frank Beckman on WJR, he said, well, Karen, what kind of standards would you be happy with? If you got to write the standards, would you be happy with them? I said, sure, for my family, and then I'd fight like heck to defeat them for the rest of the country. Because who am I to say what the rest of the country, or even the next district over, ought to be doing in education? So nobody is against standards in that true form. Every parent has a standard for what and how they want their child to be educated. That was the purpose of local districts and local control. And it's interesting, one of the documents that I read is called Jobs for the Future, talking about the credentialing aspect of it. And they basically said, in order for this P20 Common Core assessment system to thrive, we have to deconstruct local control. That'll tell you it right there, that they're not really in this just for a higher standard. They're in this for national and state level control. Demolishing local control and really parental voice.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. I just want to ask a question. How many people have gone online and actually read the Common Core standards? So I'm just curious, what among them do you find particularly objectionable?
I'll answer that. The idea that we can measure grit, tenacity, and perseverance. We have now computer-adapted testing to go along with these standards, aligned to these standards. And it's a federal document, the report on grit, tenacity, and standards. And one of the quotes from there, I have it in my notes, but I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's too impractical to have an MRI in every classroom. And I stopped for a minute, I thought, is that the only objection you have? Is that it's just not practical to have an MRI in every classroom? So these standards are met, and you'll see that right in the exemplars and things that they talk about within the standards, that we're measuring perseverance, we're measuring grit, we're measuring tenacity. How do they do that? On these assessments. How long does it take for a child to answer a question? Do they quit too soon? Do they just leave it blank? Are they guessing? So those are the things that these standards are measuring, and it is in the standards themselves. You'll see the words perseverance in there. So on that level, I agree with it. And it's also constructivist education, and I don't need to get into that in depth. Tobacco can share with us even more on that. But it's a constructivist mindset, which is the worldview that these standards are adapted from. And now I fundamentally reject that. But as a parent, I'm allowed to. I homeschool my kids, being homeschoolers.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Handel, would you like some response from the audience?
I'm sorry.
Would you like some response from the audience to your question?
Yeah, I mean, if there's others, I am curious.
Could you ask the questions from the audience or
There's no mic.
I'll speak now. Thank you.
I'll answer that question in regards to the standards. It's very much the same answer that Karen did. There is no pure, admirable, wonderful standard for all students. The standards as written are okay. The standards, creeds, Common Core are okay. And I have my own standards. We all have the standards. It is the ancillary way in which those standards are being imposed, tested, and forced on students in the classroom. So there's no good answer about do we like these standards, do we not like the standards. I will say that what the standards purport to do in terms of problem solving is not proven. So we are turning our school system upside down for something that has not been validated properly here.
Can I add to that? One of the things that I keep hearing is standards, 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 standards. To refer what Common Core is doing to, I say our children, I don't have any, but what Common Core is doing to our children has nothing to do with standards. This is a subversive use of language that redirects the focus away from what Common Core is truly intended to accomplish. And at the risk of sounding like we're a little wackadoodle in here, it's very socialistic. Socialistic is bad. I mean, look how many people have been murdered by their own government over time. Now, I'm not saying Common Core is setting out to murder people. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that directing the mindset of our young children to a place where it's all about the whales and all about the penguins and all about the global. And this thing about the language, I forget what you said, the science they take in school. But for crying out loud, there is such a thing as foreign. And right now, Common Core is taking foreign ideas and foreign principles, even in terms of, Karen talked about the Christianity part, everything that's completely opposed to anything that's Christian, anything that's completely opposed to anything that we in this country have stood for since the founding, and those who wrote our Constitution, which remember, it's the United States of America. It's not a federal government. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic that is an election of states who have decided to band together for common defense. And so don't let the word standards mislead you to what really is at the core of Common Core. It's more
That's because we're supposed to be one big happy world right now.
yeah.
The next question, what is the consequence if a child is unable to decide their career choice by 10th or 11th grade?
There's no consequence. It's part of the Common Core, right?
Well, as part of the P20 system, there is definitely a consequence. What is the consequence when you only get a 19 on the ACT? The U of M is not going to accept you. Wayne State might, on probation. So there's a consequence. There is no failure in the P20 system. There is no remediation, and that was what Lieutenant Governor Calley told me personally. He said, Karen, how can you be against P20? He's actually a supporter of it. And he said, Karen, how can you be against P20? There's no remediation. Well, in a system where there's no remediation, guess what there is? No second chance. And here's the difference. I graduated from Warren Mott High School in 1981. I had calculus as a high school senior. My friend here, not her, sitting next to me in my senior class, did not have calculus. We both got accepted to the University of Michigan. We both majored in engineering. I have a degree in computer science and he in mechanical engineering. He had to take remedial classes before he could get to the level. He had a great grade 1 and a great ACT, but he didn't have the coursework that was required for an engineering degree. So he had to take remedial classes. He had to take pre-calc before he could take Calc 1. I flew through Calc 1, sandbagged, and got an 4.0 in the first 2 calcs. So that's the difference. So there is no failure in a P20 system. There is the consequences. Your choices are limited. Mr. Handel said specifically when his son took the work keys test, one career was open to him, another career was not. The work keys is required for every 11th grader. And Governor Snyder said last September he wants to tie that 11th grade test to hiring. Want to know the consequence? A work keys test mandated by the state in 11th grade. Oh, I'm sorry, you only got a bronze. I call it the Employability Olympics. You only got a bronze. You didn't get the gold medal in employability standards on your work keys exam. These are the jobs available to you. And go on the Work Ready Career Readiness website, and it will say counselors are now being retrained to look at that score and tell you what career you're qualified for.
What would Steve Jobs say about this?
So,
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think you have to make, I think there's some confounding going on about what the Common Core is and what the assessments are and what the ACT and other college requirements are, right? I mean, we've worked with partners on the west side of the state that have been using work keys for years for job placement and other things, right? So this is not something that the Common Core created, right? And as far as I know, there's no requirement that the Common Core makes you fill out career projections either. So,
the idea. So the work keys assessment my son took. His limit wasn't based on high school performance. It says before you could get into the training program. After he graduated from high school, you have to take a test to get into almost whatever you want to do, whether it's a university, a job training program. So the idea is that assessments are horrible in school, but when they're waiting for you in the outside world, do you want kids to be prepared or not? I told Sarah, before we got here, the story. My wife, so when we first married, go back 20 years ago, my wife mentored a young lady in a high school and got very involved. She was a senior. So this girl was passed through her high school class. She got a C in a chemistry test, and a chemistry class in which she failed every test. The high school graduated her. Pat on the back, we've done our job, we've prepared her. Well, her ACT test said otherwise, but the university admitted her based on what the school said. The school said, you're right, you have a 2-point GPA. She goes off to college and bombs out in her first semester. So, was this child really prepared or not? I mean, did the fact that she failed the test limit or expand her opportunities? It limited her opportunities. She wasn't prepared coming out of high school. So the notion that a test is an evil thing at high school, and it's just telling you where you're at so you can prepare, is just wrong.
To the point on the Common Core, and I'm conflating facts here. I can understand how somebody who wants to segment these things wants that to be the case. If I'm in a factory and I'm watching and talking only to the people who are manufacturing the wheel, what are they manufacturing? A wheel. And if I go to the engine plant and I ask the engine people, what are you building? They're going to tell you an engine. And if I tell them both, you know what, you're building a wheel and you're building an engine, did you know you're actually building a car? They'll look at you and say, no, I'm only building a wheel. And the person will hear, no, I'm only building an engine. Right? Because it takes the higher level executive to tell you that they're building a car. And if they only tell the guy on the factory floor he's building a wheel, that's all he's going to believe he's going to build. The same thing is true in a P20 system. Common Core assessments on Common Core standards are math and English language arts. In their pure form, no argument there. But what are we building here? Governor Snyder said it clear. And I want to read to you what Mark Tucker, who was Michael Cohen's associate in the Clinton administration, said. And he's now pushing the Common Core and this whole P20 system. They don't want to have it and give it a name. Notice there's no name for this. It used to be called outcome-based education. They've learned the rules of the ropes. Don't give it a name. Just start building the components. And this is what Mark Tucker said a few years ago, and it's in my notes here for you. There is no high school diploma in such systems. There are only standards and the grades one gets on the exams. And those grades are understood in the same way by school authorities, the students, and the the parents, the employers, and the universities and technical schools. What is effective about such a system is that all students know just what they need to go on to the next stage of their lives. Don't give them too much. They might start thinking about being a doctor instead of just an X-ray tech. Schools know just what they need to teach for their students to be successful. The downside of such a system, from an American standpoint, is that in its traditional form in most countries, it has been used to sort students into futures from which there is little chance of escape. That's the P20 system. That's Mark Tucker. That's school to work. That's what Governor Snyder's doing. That's what the Chamber's promoting, and that's what they don't want you to know about. Just look at the tire and call it mapping and playing with cars, and please don't ask why we're doing a car.
I would submit there aren't many people making car tires that don't know that they're in car tires.
Well, of course, that's a simplistic example.
Well,
But I submit to you that there are a lot of people who are promoting the Common Core that don't know they're building P20.
Good.
We need a little more of that.
Okay.
Are you good?
Yep.
What about American history being rewritten? And the approach to educating our children?
Could you speak up, please?
What about American history being rewritten and the approach to educating our children?
The Common Core does not address history. The Common Core, English language art, and math doesn't address history.
The Common Core architect actually is now at the college board. He's been writing things like AP U.S. history. And his approach, this is all part of the agenda, P20, call it what you like. The same guy that created the Common Core is giving AP U.S. history, which is very anti-American. We hate black people, we hate Indians, we've never done anything good. I encourage you to go look at them yourself, but write that on the internet for you.
Yeah, I encourage you to go read the standards, because they don't say anything about American history and how to teach that. They encourage teaching reading through teaching history, and I think that's probably the extent of their mention of history.
You seem to be saying that Common Core is aimed at improving technical skills. However, most of the Common Core I've seen addresses values and beliefs. Can you explain this? However, most of the Common Core I've seen addresses values and beliefs. Can you explain this?
I just would disagree with that assessment. I don't, from what I've read, and I've not read every single one, but what I've read doesn't address values and beliefs. It describes what a student should be able to do at a certain level, but not the value of it. And I don't believe the Common Core should be teaching technical skills. It's to prepare kids to pursue education beyond high school based on what the kid wants to do.
Can I just interrupt there? You're elevated the child for parental decisions and encouragement and whatever. What you're saying is that the child should decide. Excuse me, the child is part of the family, and the family has to give their encouragement. Things do change as children get older to the point where you are a young adult and so forth, but they always have the push of the family. So we don't want to turn around and put this into the option of the child to say that, hey, I want to do this. Excuse me, where did he get these ideas? You have to pay attention to the family.
I totally agree.
Very good. I know we could agree. We actually want the same things. Everybody sitting up in front here really wants the same thing.
I wish my 20-year-old was taking more advice from me.
My experience with the Common Core state standards for ELA math only, when you're talking about just that piece of the P20, there are a couple things if you go read the standards. Like, for example, if you look at the appendix, one of the recommended books is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. If you have ever read so much filth in your life, go read the summary, don't read the book. Well, go read it if you want, but it's disgusting. What I have found back to different pieces and different tentacles related to this P20, again, an example would be AP U.S. history. Also AP Bio has been rewritten, every other word. is evolution and in this and that. So, you know, purely the standards for ELA and math, you know, you're not going to see a lot of that. But it's these different tentacles where you will see this. And the biggest piece where I see it is the Common Core alignment assessment. That's where you're going to see a lot of the questions that treat overwhelming as fact and these types of things.
Why is federal control of state or local educational standards necessary? Why are federal and national standards?
You know, I think just because all 50 states might agree that 2 + 2 is 4, doesn't mean that the federal government is making us teach that, right? I mean, I think it's incorrect to assume that just because there's a lot of agreement across the nation about what our kids should know when they graduate high school means that the federal government is telling us that that's what they need to know. That's not what's happening. The federal government is not making us adopt Common Core. Our state leaders who are elected adopted Common Core voluntarily. And
No, we did not. Accept it voluntarily.
the state leaders adopted them voluntarily.
No.
Folks, we have 17 questions left to go through and very little time. So we're going to be really quick on that.
The federal government, Governor Snyder himself admitted, that he's a governor, he's part of the National Governors Association, that the federal government is involved, and his words to me directly were, it is challenging. Some of the governors don't like it. So it is false to say that the federal government is not involved in incentivizing it. I read the quote from Obama. President Obama said that he incentivized it. It's actually a soft form of fascism where we created this business-private public partnership and incentivized it. The federal government incentivized it, and that's what allowed 45 states to adopt it so quickly. I don't even think the Common Core Standards Initiative people thought that would happen so quickly. But Governor Snyder admitted that the federal government is involved, and he finds it challenging. So I think I'll go with him on that.
And the United States Secretary of Education said when a lot of parents all over the country opted their children out of the test, I think we're going to have to step in.
Well, under the Common Core math, if a child can explain how 2 + 2 = 5, and then he decides to become a rocket scientist, and on their way to Mars, they miss the planet by only a few million miles, but he can explain how they got there, is that as good as landing on the planet?
Okay, everyone, we're here for information and education and to be polite. So we're going to have to go through these questions in a timely manner to get hopefully all of them through. Is there any way to bypass the SAT next year for seniors in high school, considering the first group of kids will be getting paid?
Repeat the last one.
Is there any way to bypass the SAT next year for juniors in high school, considering the first group of kids will be guinea pigs? Basically, is there any way to bypass the SAT next year?
It depends on your local school district. Right now, the local schools are setting their graduation requirements. They're trying to change that. That is one of the ways that they're doing that. But it depends on your local school district. If they require the MME for graduation, you have to take the MME. And the MME right now is for next year is going to include the SAT. Even though a leading SAT tutor said don't take the first 3 versions of the test, Michigan switched from the ACT this year, retained work keys, but is implementing the SAT. And then it was just announced that we're going to use the PSAT as the 9th and 10th grade assessment. So they've actually got a PSAT 8-9, a PSAT 10, a PSAT National Merit that they'll take in 8th and 9th and 10th grade. And then the MME, which is the SAT, they'll take in 11th grade. And the answer to whoever asked that question, check with your local district. Most districts are requiring the MME for graduation. I would opt out if I were you. My kids didn't graduate with the SAT, and they're all in college and doing great. And I think that's one of the cheap ways that these people have a voice in stopping this, is to tell them no to the assessment.
How do you opt out if they're making it mandatory for graduation?
You have to decide where your allegiance is. Is your allegiance to getting a diploma from a bogus institution called public school that has adopted a standard you disagree with? I mean, I don't go to my neighbor and ask them, hey, how do you like my house? You know, it's a matter of what you want as your long-term goals. At what point, I tell people, I have 2 sons who are willing to die for freedom. You know, for other people, it may be boycotting a task. It's a matter of where your convictions go and how far they go and how far you want to stop the move towards national conformity in education.
And you still have your transcript for the colleges. It's not like your grades and coursework was done.
What happens when various aspects of CCSS fail? How can we have a voice to fix it if it is all centralized in Washington? No more local decision making.
Well, Sarah said, your state legislature and your elected state board of education voted to adopt standards. There's a democratic process, state level, that got us to the point we're at. So it's not controlled in Washington, it's controlled at the state level. Appropriately.
I have the minutes up from the state board adoption, and when they adopted it, I'll just read it as a presentation on Common Core standards for English and language and literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. So even though we're being told today that the Common Core is just math and English language arts, the state school board, when they were presented with the facts on Common Core, said that there is literacy in history and social studies and science and the technical things that are included as part of the complete package of the Common Core. That's from the minutes of the State Board of Education. They adopted something knowing that history and science were going to be affected by the Common Core standards. To change it, we have to get out of the Common Core.
But just to clarify, it's not about the content of science and social studies and history. It's about teaching literacy through those subjects. So the Common Core addresses how a teacher might teach certain standards by teaching them through the content of science. It doesn't dictate the content of science. It says that, research and evidence suggests that kids learn to read best in the context of whatever they're reading, knowing, facts about science or social studies. That's what it's getting at. So we need to clarify that.
Statistics are that pre-standard students perform slightly better than students after No Child Left Behind standards. What is the evidence that Common Core standards will produce anything better?
Our national scores have actually gone up on the national assessment since No Child Left Behind, but I actually don't think it's relevant here because No Child Left Behind wasn't a set of standards. So I don't think, I'm not sure that it's related necessarily to what's happening with Common Core. What's that?
We don't have any record of it improving test scores?
We do have, so since No Child Left Behind is the question. So since No Child Left Behind in the early 2000s, national test scores have improved.
Who vetted CCSS? To my knowledge, it was not validated by any college nor any of the college professors on the validation committee.
Well, I think they've had pilot testing of the assessments. I think as far as validating them, they were based on research and evidence from the academy and from K-12 educators. So, that evidence had been validated over years of, how to best sort of address teaching reading or teaching math. And we're in the midst of testing right now on the first years of implementation. So we're just now getting data on sort of how they're playing out in the field.
They seem to have been adored by the university presidents. I've seen editorials from the chancellors of the University of California system, New York University system saying, look, we're tired of kids coming to us not prepared to learn in our institutions. We want kids coming to us with critical thinking skills that will allow them to enter our institutions and earn a degree. And we just don't see enough kids prepared when they get it. That's why they come over.
Where's the accountability of who has been teaching them all these years?
Well, so exactly. And the idea here is I go back to the system. I don't think I articulated the issue with my wife's student very well. But so even if we all agree, we don't agree, but even if we all agree that the Common Core standards were a good thing you had in place, just because you have a standard doesn't mean teachers are going to teach to it effectively, right? But it's that if you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have a target, you'll never get where you're trying to go. There are a roadmap that tells us where we should be. Just putting it in place doesn't mean kids are going to get there, but an assessment tied to the roadmap tells you here's the standard, how many kids got there, how many didn't. So there is no guarantee. I completely agree. This is not nobody at this table will tell you having the standards wherever they're coming from is a panacea is going to fix everything in education. You still have to have teachers that are able to teach the standards, and we have a long way to go.
Can we get back to the validation question really quickly here? Two of the people on the validation committee testified in the Michigan legislature against the Common Core standard. Sandra Stotsky, her face on the left, tells it all. She said there's no evidence that these standards are going to work. And Zeb Warman, the leading mathematician in the country on the validation committee, also said these standards are too low. Both of them refused to sign off. James Milgram said Common Core doesn't even come close to the rhetoric that surrounds it. It doesn't even begin to approach the issues it supposedly is designed to attack. Those are three people on the validation committee that refused to validate the standards. Michigan adopted the standards 3 weeks after the final version was released. The final version was released on June 5th, I believe, or June 2nd of 2010. We adopted them on June 15th or somewhere right around there. Right around 3 weeks period of time. We didn't listen to the people on the validation committee. We just went right ahead of them and adopted them anyway. So the validation committee does not validate them. Doesn't that tell you a lot right there?
And if you go to corestandards.org, you'll see none of those people mentioned as being part of the process.
They dropped them.
Should parents be allowed to opt out of testing?
The law allows it. You're the parent. The schools work for you.
Yeah.
I'm so good.
So should they give the opt-out, no matter your reason, just because they object?
I think the individual parent has the right to make that.
Thank you. That's what I wanted.
My question is really long, so she just want to answer my own way. First of all, Greg, you made a comment about us dumbing down curriculum, and that's not what we're here about.
I never said anyone here wanted to dump
Oh,
on
I know,
curriculum.
but you said something dumbing down curriculum, that's not what we're concerned about. But I do have a question about how teachers are teaching, and unfortunately, I see a lot of kids are going to be damaged because of this until they realize this is a mistake. Because it's the curriculum I have a problem with. I talked to one teacher, okay, my granddaughter was doing very well in school until Common Core curriculum math came in. She had the answer right, twice. But because she couldn't get it the third way, her teacher marked her wrong. I talked to another teacher who said, well, that's not the way I teach. If they get the answer one way, I pass them. So what I'm teaching, now my granddaughter's family, but another teacher is teaching it differently, and that kid's going to succeed. So you tell me how these teachers are being taught to train to the curriculum. Not the standards, but what these kids are actually having to do as far as the work. That's my concern. Can anybody tell me how the teachers teaching? The teacher that I talked to said that nobody told her how to teach to it.
Within the standards, you will see strategies.
Yeah, I can read you what you're saying.
This is Deb DeBacker. She works with us.
All right, here's math content 1.08, that's first grade C6. Here we go. Add and subtract within 20, demonstrating fluency for addition and subtraction within 10. Use strategies such as counting on, that's like 10, 11, 12, you're counting on your fingers. Making 10. So 8 plus 6 equals 8 plus 2 plus 4 equals 10 plus 4 equals 14. That kind of confusing thing your granddaughter's probably doing. Decomposing a number leading to a 10, such as 13 minus 4 equals 13 minus 3 minus 1 equals 10. Minus 1 equals 9. Using the relationship between addition and subtraction, knowing 8 plus 4 equals 12, one knows 12 minus 8 equals 4. But sometimes you only learn addition, and then you learn subtraction later in first grade, so I don't know how they expect that. And creating equivalent but easier or known sums, such as 6 plus 6 plus 1 equals 12 plus 1 equals 13. So that's how I think she's confused. And I am reading the standard. That is confused. Those things that parents are complaining about are really in the standards. There's not just you need to know adding 1 through 10, 1 up to 10 in the first grade, that kind of thing. That's, I'm reading a standard.
Smirking's not really a response to those facts either.
Yeah, I'm not trying to smirk. I mean, honestly, I think there's a lot of healthy debate we had about implementation.
But the sad thing is, though, I'm going to say something quiet. Kids are being damaged right now. They're being labeled as losers or stupid or whatever because they don't understand this.
Yeah,
And our kids are being picked, that's right.
well, I put that in the same category as the language acquisition, right? Like, I mean, this is a really poor interpretation and implementation of the standards we're meant to be, right? And I think she's reading the standard. She said she was reading the standard. That wasn't the standard, I think that was what the intent about how you might go about teaching the standard.
So I have a 4th grader and an 11th grader and I have a really graduated in 09. There is such a difference between my daughter graduated in 09 and my 4th grader right now. It's crazy. I was the only one that opted her out of her class. The M-STEP test was insane for these poor kids and it was tough and confusing. I understand what you're saying, but I really think that, you guys are getting a list, like a lot of their records. I don't believe it enough. Not many people even know about Common Core and stuff. But there's a problem when the kids are having issues taking these M-STEP tests or these standardized tests. They don't know how to take them, they don't understand them. But my daughter's friend, who is a brilliant little girl, came home crying every day after taking M-STEP. I don't understand the question. This girl reads 7th and 8th grade chapter books. She would not understand the question. So I think you guys need to look more into the standards, not what you're given by how you see, but look at the books we are looking at. Look at the books. Look at what they're being taught. Talk to the teachers when they're not in the school, if they're not allowed to discuss it. The teachers cannot stand it. A lot of them are teaching, and they feel like they're I understand where you guys are trying to come from, but I really don't think that the people that are making the decisions actually see what we are seeing.
So I have talked to teachers. And just said, and outside of school, I have a lot of friends that are teachers. And not all of them are fans of Common Core. But I've talked to the majority of the rest of them. These are the things that my sister is a public school teacher in California. She was teacher of the year in her fairly large district 1 year. And so I asked her, I said, are these the kind of things your kids should know? She said, yes. She hasn't been a huge fan of every step of the implementation. But she said, these are the kind of things I want my kids to know at the end of 3rd grade. And if I want my kids to be able to do those things, I think that the kids I teach in a much poorer district than her kids should also know how to do those things.
I agree, but I think we look at the question or comment, the way it's being taught. It's ridiculous. And I understand the way it's being taught is not considered the standards, but that's the issue.
And I completely agree with you. What I heard from teachers is that if these are in your standards, then they need some training on how to do it, right?
But if we're teaching 4th grade math, and you're a teacher, we should be training on how to teach 4th grade math. That's my thing. If my daughter knows 4 is 8, that's how she needs to know. 4 is 8. That's some different ways to understand it. Why do teachers need to be taught how to teach 4th grade math? If you're doing it here, my old daughter,
Thank you, Ms. Thank you very much. If Michigan adopted Common Core 5 years ago, what schools have Common Core curriculum? The education of our children should not be up to us and our government. My granddaughter, homeschooled, is going to Stanford this fall. The question is, basically, Michigan adopted Common Core 5 years ago. What schools have Common Core curriculum?
Like each school school district has its own curriculum to reach those standards. It's not a Common Core curriculum. Some schools are going to do a really good job. Some schools are going to struggle. But, you know, I submit that a school that is struggling to reach those standards, you know, what kind of job are they doing in the first place?
Achieve, the organization that funded and lobbied the National Government Association and the Chief Council of State School Officers to adopt the standards, is currently working on model curriculum to go with the Common Core. They're testing it in at least 3 states. I believe they've even upped it now closer to 12. You can read about it in their annual reports that they put out every year on it. So, and we had Professor Schmidt from Michigan State University who said, when he testified 2 summers ago, right now there is no real curriculum. Anything the schools are buying is really a waste of money because really what we're going to see is a more conformity of curriculum as we move forward. And that is logical, because when you have common standards, you're going to have common curricula. And we see that in how many states now in the world. All of California has gone to iPads, thank you, Apple and Microsoft. Well, what's the purpose of that? Because you can easily change a textbook. I mean, difficulty in changing a textbook, but very easily change a web page. So what a student reads in 10th grade is very easily adapted over time, so they're going to all online learning, online assessments, so that they can quickly modify and adapt the curriculum as we move forward to model curriculum.
We are going to ask for a 2-minute wrap-up on each side.
So I thank you for the venue and the opportunity to talk about our side of this. I want to just revisit what I started with. Our goal, I mean, just personally as a parent, and but, you know, also representing the chamber. I am here representing the business community. I'm not trying to hide that. But what the business community needs and what parents need, we need kids with critical thinking skills who graduate from high school, able to choose their own destiny with the help of the gentleman who was talking about family. Isn't there? But, you know, with guys to choose their own destiny, not be slotted into, you know, you only had to meet certain standards so you can go into a trade school. You met other standards so you can go on to college. And so all kids get the basic coursework that will allow them to determine their own destiny. And, you know, the business community needs the same thing. The days of slotting people into kind of very routine work where you just need people with very low skills to do stuff, it's over. I mean, those companies need people with critical thinking skills. Companies are going to where those people are. People with high skills have more power than the companies who employ them. The companies have to go and find them and they'll go to where they are. So as a state, we need to decide, do we want people with critical thinking skills who can do high-level intellectual work, stuff that they find rewarding? You know, we do, we're going to need to meet high standards. That's what this is all about. It means more choices for students, not fewer.
Yeah, I think the conversation about implementation, about how this is being interpreted by teachers in schools is a really important one. We know from teachers themselves that there's a lot of inconsistency about how they're understanding what the standards mean for their teaching and how they're supposed to be interacting with kids. We're hearing from many of you that the experiences your students are having are not good. And based on my read of the standards, are not aligned with what we would expect good instruction or curriculum to look like that was aligned with the standards. So, you know, I think we may be in slightly different places, some of you on whether we should have adapted these in the first place, but any standards we have in Michigan, we need effective teachers to implement them in the classroom. That's when it's going to affect our kids. And if you're not getting the kind of instruction that your kids need, and your schools aren't being responsive to you, then I think that is a point that we are in complete agreement about, that you should be pushing your schools and your district and your state to be supporting your teachers better and implementing whatever standards we have, whether it's the Common Core or Michigan Creative.
I'd just like to say that I don't disagree with several of the things they just said. But again, I think it has to do with philosophical differences and conclusions that we come to. The focus on the Common Core standards, I think, is really dangerous. I don't often use that term. I just teach 20 and the agenda and these different things. Bill Gates is has put billions of dollars into the implementation of this, and he has a contract, Microsoft does, with UNESCO. As a UN organization. And he has agreed to the global Constitution of UNESCO, and there are contracts for UNESCO to be involved in the development of our curriculum. Pearson is a huge education company. It's not even American. They are in our schools with books and curriculum and tests and everything. I call for American-driven, local control education.
In summary, just remember one thing. What is tested is what is taught. What is taught is what is thought. So in a Common Core world, when you have assessments driving, you don't have assessments driving what is taught in the classroom. So in one sense, we are correct at implementation. But when the state comes in and says, teacher, your evaluation is based on these assessments that these students have, that teacher is going to make sure that she retains her job, not necessarily teaches what she wants to effectively teach. That's why we're having teacher evaluation debates in the legislature. So the idea here is a P20 system. There's this graphic. This is from the Holland Public School System. And you can see where they break it down. Birth, kindergarten, 3rd grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, and post-secondary. This is what they're viewing as the track now, the P20 seamless system. I didn't make this up. Common assessments, common standards, and credentialing are the 3 tiers or 3 legs of this P20 system. So when you think about Common Core going forward, think of it not in isolation of math and English language arts. Think of it as one leg in a triangle that is supporting P20. And what they needed was standards first, assessments followed, and wouldn't you know, 2015, we've got the first state credential in our state legislature. I don't make it up. It's not hard to connect the dots. They just don't want you to connect